This is the end. Hold your breath and count to 10. Feel the earth move and then hear my heart burst again. For this is the end. I'm drowned and dread. This is the end. I've drowned and dreamt this moment. So overdue, I owe day. Swept away, I'm stolen. This is the end.
Those are. So now let's get to this New Mexico. You heard about this radiation leak, which was reported maybe about 2 weeks ago now, and it was dismissed in the media as, you know, you always hear this explanation. They were not exposed to radiation any more than what you would get in an X-ray. That always seems to be the common, you know, I hear that so many times. Or, you know, you go to the dentist, you get more radiation. You take a flight, you get more radiation. That's the common mantra that's repeated. So what can you tell us about not just this one leak, but I believe from what I have heard that there are leaks ongoing all the time. So it's not just Fukushima that we have to worry about, is it?
It's all the nuclear facilities globally, and they are booby traps. Every single one of them is a potential Fukushima or a lower level nuclear disaster, depending on how much radiation is involved in the facility. So what happened is, when we began to develop a nuclear weapons program, and they were already building nuclear weapons during World War II, it wasn't just the 2 bombs for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They actually started the arsenal without permission. And the Manhattan Project contract ended 3 months after World War II ended, but it's still going on without any contract. So the first nuclear bomb test after Hiroshima and Nagasaki was in 1946, and it was called Operation Crossroads in the Marshall Islands. The nuclear waste produced in the United States for the nuclear bomb project, followed by nuclear power plants, followed by depleted uranium and exotic nuclear weapons introduced in 1990 in the Iraq War and used in Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, and other locations, that has accumulated a very, very substantial and extremely dangerous pile of nuclear garbage. The U.S. government went to every state in the United States for 50 years to try to get the politicians and the citizens in that state to allow a nuclear waste dump facility to be built in their state. In every state, the politicians and the people ran the government out of the state, literally hounded them, gang-stalked them, forced them physically out of the venues where they were presenting this proposal, and just plain ran them out. They said N-O. Now, finally, they went to New Mexico, which was already contaminated with the Los Alamos Nuclear Weapons Lab and the Trinity test of the first nuclear weapon before they dropped the atomic bombs. A lot of people don't know this history. And the New Mexico legislature voted to allow a waste isolation pilot program. The acronym is WIP, and we'll call it WIP from now on, to be conducted. It was a pilot study in New Mexico if the federal government built an entire new road, highway, and freeway infrastructure in the state. So the government built it. The Department of Energy started the WIP project, which is underground in a salt deposit where they wanted to put the nuclear waste in canisters and study if it was safe, how long it was safe, so forth and so on. As soon as the freeways and highways were finished, the state legislature passed a law saying that no nuclear waste could be transported over any roads or highways in New Mexico. And they also passed a law that it could not be flown in airplanes. So that basically drove the project into Nevada, which was the last state that was possible to store this stuff in, and that was called the Yucca Mountain Project. Now, the reason it happened is because of the screw Nevada bill that was in Congress, and the Nevada legislators' congressional delegation did not have enough juice or influence in Congress to vote it down, so they got stuck with it. And I worked as a geochemist at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab on the WIP project and the Yucca Mountain project. They spent $2.5 billion on these projects to develop a canister, a package or a canister that would hold the waste. And the waste cans came back from the WIP project and the Yucca Mountain project when I was at Livermore, and they had been underground for 5 years. At WIP, they put low-level nuclear waste, things like contaminated clothing and things like that in the cans. And the National Academy of Sciences mandated that the waste had to be guaranteed to be safe for 200,000 years. 200,000 years, Paul. 5 years later, the canisters came back. The bacteria had eaten all of the metal canister and left the waste sitting there on the floor. This is like the bacteria eating a beer can and leaving the beer there. So a judge ordered the Yucca Mountain project to completely destroy all of their nuclear research, everything on that project. This is just a couple of years ago. If they wanted to continue with this scheme to build a nuclear waste repository in Nevada. Now, it's obvious now with these leaks that we're talking about now at Los Alamos and the WIP project also in New Mexico, that they can't keep the waste in the canisters, but now from these leaks we know they can't keep the nuclear waste in the mine that they're buried in. So this is another big total example of science fraud.
Well, this is a very dangerous example that you're giving, because if there is no place to store this waste, and this waste is building up every day, I would assume, how can it ever be disposed of?
There is no technology now. And the reason is because the nuclear materials, such as uranium and plutonium, are formed out in outer space in supernovas. Each of the star processes, the red giants produce iron. The supernovas produce plutonium and uranium. These are energy and temperature environments that are unknown on this planet. And each of these atoms, molecules, hunks of radioactive materials they represent the energy of a supernova or a red giant. There's no way to develop technologies now with the status of science. They need different science. They need different physics. They need other types of science and scientific answers to be able to deal with this waste. There is no way to clean it up. There is no way to store it, and there's no way to make it safe. The U.S. Congress ordered the Army in the 1990s to decrease the radioactivity of depleted uranium because soldiers and people were getting sick from it. 3 years later, the Army came back and said, there's no way to diminish the radiation. It's inherent to the material. So they've created all these nuclear toys and nuclear waste, which is completely insane. It's actually being used as a poison to depopulate this planet, humanity, eliminate much of the human population, and to alter human chromosomes. So they're changing the human race. These are people who are completely insane behind these technologies, and unfortunately they're in charge. They're on the top of the power structure, and they are doing things without the consent or the involvement or making the public aware. And it's a complete criminal operation.
Well, that's one. I mean, that's the where people like yourself are really, and the information you present is appreciated by guys like me who don't have any clue that this is going on. So I applaud the work that you do in informing the general public who's not aware of these dangers, which seem to be mounting by the day. So now these nuclear weapon industry, by the way, I think, isn't that like the WIP project in New Mexico, that they accept this waste coming out of all these armaments factories and the military waste, and I assume that the military generates an awful quantity of this waste, and somewhere along the line it has to be disposed of, and that's where it goes. Is that correct, that that's what this WIP project is? That
is correct. All of the Canadian uranium that comes into the United States for reprocessing, or for enrichment, I should say, it happens at the Oak Ridge Nuclear Weapons Lab in Tennessee. And the fissile uranium-235, which goes into nuclear fuel for power plants and into nuclear bombs, nuclear weapons, is separated from the rest of the uranium, the natural uranium being brought down from Canada. All of the depleted uranium weapons, since it was introduced in 1990 to the battlefield in Iraq, all of it is the Queen's uranium. Queen Elizabeth owns the mineral rights to the United Kingdom and all of the Commonwealth. And it is her 9 mines that she personally owns. She also personally owns British Petroleum, that it's her uranium that is poisoning the whole world. Now, 2 or 3 days ago, an article came out that exposes that Queen Elizabeth has a $17 trillion part or portion of the global uranium trade. It's Queen Elizabeth who is personally profiting from this global genocide. And the use of depleted uranium weapons and nuclear weapons is illegal. It's completely illegal. And yet it's so powerful because it involves so many contractors, so many corporations, so many royal families, and of course the international financiers are the ones that the weapons of mass destruction are actually made for. So the University of California is actually working the purpose hidden behind student education, is that they're the largest and most dangerous weapons of mass destruction manufacturer in the world.
It reminds me, this reminds me of that movie Planet of the Apes. At the end, when he realizes the madness, and maybe that's what will happen. We'll all end up becoming apes.
Well, we're certainly.
Isn't that like it's a genetic experimentation in progress? Is it not?
Yes, it is, and the madness behind what is happening now. It's the whole total destruction of the biosphere. The South Island of New Zealand is being invaded by military troops from different countries. The people are being poisoned by Fukushima radiation that's being directed using HAARP, this global antenna system, to funnel it down into Australia and New Zealand. And it's the British military taking over and annexing the South Island of New Zealand so they can use it as a military base to hop off of for mining projects in Antarctica. And that is Queen Elizabeth, or the next king, who will directly and personally benefit from mining Antarctica. Well, they're destroying the whole planet, the ecosystem. The oceans are contaminated now with the Fukushima radiation. It's the atmosphere and the oceans, and it's going to have unintended consequences. Mother Nature, when she kicks back, she spanks hard. And what has happened, for instance, unintended consequences, I just heard about this morning from Okinawa. At the Kadena U.S. military base, a fighter jet landed yesterday or today with the windshield that had fallen off of it without a windshield. And this is the third fighter jet at Kadena that has lost the windshield in flight. And not only that, the other airplanes in that area have also lost other parts of the planes. Well, when you have a commercial jet and a pilot falls asleep at the wheel, there's a co-pilot and other crew to land the plane safely. And by the way, the pilots are falling asleep and having strokes and heart attacks while they're flying passenger planes because of radiation exposure to the crews. Alaska Airlines has been especially hard hit with the effects of the radiation exposure. And back to Kadena and the military planes, this effect is called the Wigner effect, W-I-G-N-E-R, that causes metals to crystallize and weaken from exposure to radiation. And I was watching a video clip from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant monitoring cameras, and the workers, there was a group of 6 workers with a crane. These are huge cranes that are taller than buildings that they use to move equipment around and to move bundles of fuel rods in and out of the buildings and in and out of the reactors. And there were about 4 or 5 other cranes in the background. This is outdoors between the reactor buildings. And I watched as a crane, just sitting there empty and turned off, suddenly, slowly collapsed behind the workers. And I said, my God, what if that had happened to the very crane they're working with right now? It would have made another nuclear disaster and could have blown up even worse than the Fukushima reactor explosions. So we're playing nuclear kabuki theater here all over the world. Any reactor can be programmed with a virus to explode, and there's nothing the public can do about it. This requires disasters on this scale, a global response, and yet British Petroleum, through the Department of Energy in the United States and TEPCO, made sure that the Fukushima disaster was as big and as bad and as prolonged as they could possibly make it. It's a total sabotage and a criminal conspiracy beyond any concept of criminality that has ever existed on this planet.
For people like us who consider ourselves to be sane or reasonable, these things are very, very hard to, at least for the average person, to digest. That there are maniacs like that sitting atop the food chain, so to speak, that are capable of taking such actions, yet the evidence of history proves that they do this time and time and time again. Everything that man builds, he destroys, and it seems like they're destroying the very planet itself now. That such insanity is really, for me, is like, it's almost unbelievable, yet I believe it.
I'm a geoscientist, so I started mapping disease. Diabetes was the first disease that I mapped. When you look at a global map of diabetes, it's in the same latitudes in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere as the locations of the nuclear bomb tests. So that was my first clue that diabetes is caused by radiation. I went to Japan and I got the vital statistics collected by the government since 1898. And in the diabetes data, you have to take the data, the numbers, and crunch it in a computer and print a graph or a map. But that data indicated there was almost no diabetes at all before World War II. There was no insulin for a long time. And so diabetics just died, and usually in childhood. Following the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings and the nuclear weapons tests by France, Russia, England, the U.S., and other countries, India, China, the increase in diabetes has been thousands of times. The increase of lung cancer from the lung cancer incidence between 1850 and 1860 in England, that was the first cancer registry, is 17,000%. Lung cancer has increased 17,000% since the 1850s, since before man-made radiation was introduced into the environment.
Instantly, didn't Madame Curie die of cancer too?
Yes, I have pictures of her as an older woman, and you can see that she's very, very ill. I have an image, which we will put in the video, of Marie Curie's hand that was amputated a year before she died. It was the right hand that won her two Nobel Prizes for her discoveries of uranium and uranium decay products. And that hand had 3 fingers on it. Her 2 fingers had already been amputated to try to save her hand. She died a year later because her whole body was full of cancer. But she is one of the nuclear pioneers. This happened to all of them. We just don't hear about it, and of course it's hidden from the public. But that hand cost her her life. Those 2 Nobel Prizes cost her her life. And this happened to many nuclear pioneers. Now it's happening to the whole entire global public. They have no way to protect themselves, and of course they're not aware that their drinking water, their food, the soil they're growing food in, and the air they're breathing is very, very contaminated. People just get sick and die eventually from long, lingering illnesses. The DNA damage is not the only problem. Neurological and neuromuscular diseases that are like polio are the highest rate of illnesses caused by radiation in Gulf-era soldiers. Cancer is the very least incident, the lowest rate of occurrence of all the illnesses. And that's why they talk about cancer. It's so they can talk about the mouse in the living room instead of the elephant in the living room.
So what exactly would then Gulf War syndrome that we hear about? I suppose that's directly related to depleted uranium. And what's the impact? How does that affect the body as if it's not cancerous or some? Is that something different than cancer?
Yes. After World War II, the rate of medical disabilities in our soldiers was 5%. Then we had the Vietnam War, where Agent Orange was introduced, which is a biological toxin and a defoliant. And that
By
was...
the way, isn't it true, sorry to interrupt you, that Agent Orange was developed by the company that became Monsanto?
Yes. And Agent Orange was used widely in Vietnam. In fact, the American fighter jets, or the American planes that were spraying Agent Orange in Vietnam were so afraid of flying over the jungle because they would get shot down by the Viet Cong resistance that they flew over their own soldiers, American soldiers, and sprayed the Agent Orange on them. Or they flew out into the ocean because our soldiers on the ground started shooting at the Agent Orange American planes flying overhead. So then the pilots started flying out over the ocean and dumping the Agent Orange. They were afraid to spray the Vietnamese resistance.
So they wouldn't get shot down and become victims to the stuff themselves.
Yes. And then what ended the Vietnam War is that the soldiers refused to kill Vietnam civilians who were supporting the Viet Cong resistance. So the soldiers started throwing fragmentation bombs at their own field commanding officers. They killed over 10,000 American field commanding officers in Vietnam. Their own soldiers did. And that is what ended the Vietnam War.
Well, this is history that we never hear about anywhere, Leuren. You know, I must say that you have access to information which is absolutely not available even on the internet, because this is something I know about Agent Orange, and we have heard things like that, but never heard that it was their soldiers killing their own officers. That is certainly hidden history, isn't it?
Well, the soldiers who were shooting at the American planes going overhead while they were being sprayed with Agent Orange, they're the ones who personally told me the story.
No, I can totally believe it. You see, like having been studying these conspiracies and how the world really works for about 20 years now, I can believe anything. So, I mean, I don't discount anything until it is absolutely disproven. So your claims would, the soldiers, of course, are, like Henry Kissinger said, you know, they are like cannon fodder to be used and disposed. So, I mean, the soldiers are not that the government cares about them or even their commanding officers care about them. They are really cannon fodder. So I'm sure at some point in time soldiers come to that realization that, hey, man, you know, nobody cares about us, so why should we give a hoot?
Yes, and that's when they begin turning on their governments and supporting the citizens. Now, the program that the U.S. military developed in Vietnam to defeat and to destroy the civilian support of the Viet Cong resistance was the Phoenix program. And Colonel Tom Ridge, who was the governor of Pennsylvania and the first Secretary of Homeland Security, was in the Phoenix program in Vietnam. Homeland Security is the Phoenix program, and it is set up in the U.S. to destroy the resistance to the takeover of the United States, which is underway now, is being facilitated and led by Homeland Security. We are losing our rights. The areas of America that are within 100 miles of the coastlines on the Atlantic and Pacific coastlines are now being declared constitution-free zones. People will have no constitutional rights Janet Napolitano has just been hired by the University of California as the new president of 14 campuses, and she just left Homeland Security. She's part of the Khazar Ashkenaz mafia, criminal mafia in the United States, who is undermining the United States. The Occupy movement was funded by George Soros for the Rothschild bankers in London and around the world, and that was the first shot on this revolution that's being carried out by aliens in the United States. These are non-citizens. We have foreign soldiers here now on our soils waiting to go in and shoot Americans and take over this country. And what
From KQED Public Radio in San Francisco, I'm Michael Krasny. Coming up on Forum this morning in our opening hour, in March 2011, an earthquake and tsunami triggered a meltdown of 3 reactors at the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. 3 years later, we examined the state of the cleanup, its effect on Japanese politics, and the impact on marine life and the environment. Forum is next. Join us for the hour after this.
This is the end. This is the end. I'm drowning, but this is the end. Baleke ya maleke. Baleke ya maleke. إذا حب ما ملكه